1851, Charleston. The Coleman house woke to the sound of cruelty dressed as ritual. Sarah Miller, 30 years old, rose from the hard plank floor of the kitchen quarters with knees raw and swollen, skin stung with lime dust. Last night had not ended with sleep. It had ended with humiliation. She had been dragged out to the front steps where the lamps still burned for the Coleman Christmas guests. They placed a bucket and brush in her hands, ordered her to kneel, and forced her to scrub the marble stairs long past midnight while laughter rolled from the veranda. The guests leaned over railings with glasses of rum punch, wagering how long she would last before collapsing. When she faltered, Tom Coleman sloshed brandy across the hem of her skirt and struck a match, letting the flame lick close before he stamped it out, chuckling that she scrubbed faster when chased by fire. They never intended to burn her. Fear itself was the entertainment. By dawn, her body ached with the stiffness of stone, but there was no time to tend to it. The bell clanged. The house stirred. Mistress Emma came sweeping into the kitchen in a silk dressing gown, thin-lipped, holding the coffee tray she claimed had gone lukewarm. She stared at Sarah as if at a defective tool. Without a word, she hefted the basin of dirty dishwater from last night's supper and emptied it over Sarah's head. Grease floated in the water, onion skins clung to her face, the dregs of wine stung her eyes. "Cold coffee deserves cold water," Emma said flatly, and left her standing in the puddle. The day moved as Charleston days always moved onward, indifferent to bruises and tears. By late morning, the Coleman brothers summoned Sarah and the boy Nate, her helper, to accompany them to the market square. The city was alive with commerce, iron-shod hooves clattering across cobblestones, vendors crying out prices for oysters, figs, and cotton. The salt air from the harbor mixed with smoke from carts frying chestnuts and the stench of the slave auction platform where bodies stood in rows, numbers tied to their arms. Children clung to mothers, their eyes hollow, waiting to be split from them like calves. The crowd bustled, indifferent. The four Coleman brothers cut through it like princes of the city. Tom swaggering first, Henry sharp-eyed, Sam with his gold-headed cane, and Walter trailing with the boredom of a man who needed cruelty to wake him from his own emptiness. Sarah walked behind them carrying baskets, head lowered, knowing that to look up was to invite a strike. They stopped at a butcher's stall where a slab of pork, already souring in the humid air, lay on the table. Tom lifted it high, grinning. "Check it, Sarah," he ordered. She understood at once what was demanded. Slowly, with the market watching, she bent forward, pressed the rancid flesh to her lips, and tasted rot. The smell of decay filled her nose, bile rose in her throat. Laughter broke from the brothers, joined by a few nearby planters who had paused to enjoy the spectacle. It was then that Nate, barely 14, thin as a reed but with fire in his eyes, stepped forward. His hands were fists at his sides. "Leave her be!" His voice cracked, boyish but fierce. For a moment the market seemed to hush, as though surprised a child would dare such words. Henry seized on it at once. With the precision of a man who had done this too often, he grabbed the boy, dragged him to a post, and lashed him fast with coarse rope. The overseer, who had followed at a distance, brought the whip, and before Sarah could move, it cracked through the air. One stripe, two, three tearing cloth and skin alike. Nate gasped, then screamed, then fell into silence, his young body jerking against the bonds. The market crowd shifted uneasily, but no one interfered. Whipping a child in public was not scandal. It was spectacle. The Colemans wanted the message clear. No one defended their property, not even each other. When they were finished, the boy sagged half unconscious. Henry tossed the whip back to the overseer, dusted his hands, and said, "That should teach him how to keep a woman in her place." The brothers laughed and returned to their purchases as if nothing had happened. Sarah rushed to Nate the moment the rope was cut. His back was raw, his breath shallow, but his eyes flickered open. She pressed a torn strip of cloth against the wounds, her hands trembling, whispering words too low for anyone else to hear. Words of comfort she had learned from her mother long ago. Words meant to close a wound the body could not. Around them, life surged on. Traders shouted over prices. Women examined bolts of cloth. The auctioneer's hammer struck again and again, selling flesh to the highest bidder. And in the middle of it all, Sarah knelt beside the bleeding boy with her palms soaked in red, while the brothers walked ahead without looking back. Something shifted inside her then. Not a cry, not an oath, just a hardening, like molten metal cooling into iron. The laughter, the humiliation, the whip's crack each entered her bones and stayed there. She lifted Nate to his feet, steadying him with her shoulder. He leaned heavy, but he walked. And Sarah, though drenched in the stink of spoiled meat and boy's blood, walked with him. The Colemans might have thought the day ended there. To them it was nothing but morning business. But for Sarah, it was the moment the silence inside her began to break, the moment the first ember of reckoning caught flame. And Charleston, bright with December sun, did not notice. Not yet. Sunday morning carried its own chain. Bells rang across Charleston, calling men and women to worship. The Coleman brothers paraded toward St. Michael's, boots polished, voices loud, while Sarah and the other slaves followed in silence at the rear. Inside the church, white marble gleamed beneath high windows. The air smelled of candle wax, wood polish, and perfume. The congregation was already seated when Henry Coleman, tall and cruelly amused, decided the sermon needed spectacle. With a shove of his boot, he forced Sarah onto her knees before the entire assembly. "Living inventory," he announced, as if she were a ledger line made flesh. Laughter rippled through the pews. Some parishioners smiled nervously, others nodded approval. The minister cleared his throat but said nothing. Scripture carried on, while Sarah knelt on cold stone, body aching, eyes fixed downward. After the service, whispers buzzed among the brothers like flies around carrion. Tom spoke first, voice casual. "Gambling's taken me further than I'd like. We'll sell the girl Lisa before the holidays. Fetch a fine price and the debt will be covered." Lisa, Sarah's niece, barely 12, her late sister's only child. The words struck like iron. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came. She could not plead. Pleading was weakness, and weakness drew punishment. Instead, she listened as the brothers weighed her niece's body as if it were cotton, as if the child's laughter had no more weight than tobacco leaf. That evening the air bit colder. Frost rimmed the fields, and the barns smelled of damp hay. Walter Coleman ordered Sarah to serve supper to the stable hands, not in the kitchen, but barefoot outside on the frozen ground. She stepped onto the ice-slick earth, toes numb, bowl balanced in her hands. The men averted their eyes. They knew to watch was to risk a lash themselves. When she returned inside, Tom was waiting. In his hand he held the clay bowl Sarah had kept hidden for years, the only relic of her mother, carried from a different plantation, fired with earth from a riverbank that no longer had a name. Without ceremony, Tom lifted it high and dashed it against the stones. The fragments skittered across the floor like broken teeth. "No more of this African trash," he sneered, and ground the largest shard beneath his heel. The sound echoed louder than the whip ever had. Sarah bent quickly, gathering the pieces, though she knew it was useless. Her hands bled from the sharp edges, but she clutched the fragments tight against her chest until the brothers mocked her for cradling them like a child. Henry, watching, smirked with a cruelty refined over years. "At Christmas," he said, "I'll show our guests how to handle the colored help. A demonstration for their amusement. You'll serve well, won't you, Sarah?" His words dripped with promise. The other brothers chuckled, pleased at the entertainment to come. Night folded over the city. The Colemans drank themselves into warmth by the fire, while Sarah sat in the cold corner of the kitchen, fragments of the shattered bowl hidden in her apron. Nate lay nearby, his wounds still raw but his spirit unbroken. Lisa, unaware of the decision sealing her fate, hummed softly to herself. Sarah listened, every note tightening around her heart like a cord. Her world had shrunk to silence, but within that silence, something else began to take shape. Not a prayer, not a plea, something heavier. The memory of her mother's voice, the weight of the broken clay, the sight of her niece's small hands, all these pressed into her bones. The humiliation in the church, the laughter of the congregation, the words living inventory, they carved themselves deeper than scars. By the time the lamps guttered and the house fell to sleep, Sarah was still awake. She sat in the dark, hands wrapped around the broken pieces of clay, and made herself a vow she could not yet name. The days narrowed toward Christmas like a corridor with no exit. The Coleman house grew louder as guests were invited, as deliveries of wine and spices arrived, as the brothers swelled with anticipation of the season. To them, Christmas was proof of wealth piles of food, barrels of rum, and slaves moving in choreographed silence. To Sarah, it was the tightening of a noose. On a grey morning, she was sent to the shed for firewood. The air smelled of resin and rot, sharp with the dampness of pine. As she lifted a log, her hand brushed against something buried deep beneath the stack. Wood shifted, iron glinted. She froze. There it lay, an axe, old but solid, its handle smoothed by years of use. She knew it at once. Her father's hands had once held it at the sawmill before chains broke his back. She lifted it slowly. The weight was perfect, balanced, familiar. For a moment she could almost feel his presence in the grain of the wood, the echo of his labor whispering through her palms. She hid it quickly. Beneath the firewood, she placed it again. Careful, like a seed planted for a future harvest. No one noticed. No one looked at Sarah closely enough to suspect. The house filled with the scent of roasting meat and citrus peel. Sarah oversaw the preparations, her hands steady, her face expressionless. Oysters were shucked, hams glazed, fowl stuffed with herbs. Rum was poured freely into sauces, into bowls, into throats. The laughter of the Coleman brothers traveled through the halls, a constant reminder of who was master and who was not. On Christmas Eve, the neighbors arrived, dressed in velvet and wool, boots stamping snow from the porch. Music rose from a fiddler in the corner, reels and hymns mingling with the clink of glasses. The Coleman brothers presided like kings, boasting of crops, of wages, of punishments inflicted on those who had dared defy. Sarah moved among them with the practiced stillness of a shadow, yet mockery followed her step. Walter ordered her to squat in the middle of the hall with a silver tray balanced on her head. The guests laughed and began to count aloud as though she were an animal in a circus ring. She remained still, jaw clenched, while their laughter ricocheted off the walls. Only when Walter waved his hand did she rise, legs trembling, dignity shredded, but silence intact. Later, in the hush between songs, Lisa was summoned. A stranger with a merchant's smile had been invited upstairs. Sarah caught only fragments. A gift for a buyer, signed before the year turns. Lisa's eyes, wide with confusion, met Sarah's as she was led away. Sarah did not move. She could not. Her body remained rooted, but inside something final snapped. The hall glittered with candlelight, with greenery, with false cheer. Guests toasted the season while Sarah's world collapsed in silence. She carried platters of meat, pitchers of rum, bowls of pudding, while her heart beat slower, heavier. Beneath the wood basket in the corner, the axe lay waiting. Each step she took toward the table felt like a step closer to it, closer to the moment she no longer feared. The guests mocked again. "Smile, girl, smile for Christmas. But her lips did not move. She endured, she waited, she carried, and deep inside, something hardened beyond return. When the last toast was raised and the candles prepared for the Bethlehem star trick, Sarah already knew. The night would not end as the brothers intended. The night was swollen with drink and song. Candle flames trembled as the Coleman brothers raised their glasses high, their words a blur of rum and arrogance. Outside, the winter wind clawed at the shutters. Inside, the great hall pulsed with heat, with music, with the smell of roasted meat and spilled liquor. Sarah moved silently among them, tray balanced in her steady hands. Each step carried her past the wood basket in the corner where fire logs waited and where something sharper, heavier, older than wood now slept beneath the kindling. The fiddler scraped his bow across the strings, striking up the Bethlehem star trick. At this signal, the candles were dimmed, leaving the hall in a half-light of embers and shadows. Guests laughed at the spectacle, faces glowing faint and ghost-like. It was the moment Sarah had counted toward for days. She set the tray down. Her hand went to the basket. Her fingers closed around the handle. The weight of the axe lifted into the air like the rising of a storm. She turned, breathing steady, and slid the bolt across the double doors of the hall. The sound iron against wood echoed above the laughter. Several guests glanced around, puzzled. Then Henry Coleman, already drunk, barked, "What's that girl doing?" The axe answered. It came down on Henry first, splitting his words into a gurgle, his body collapsing against the feast he had mocked her with. Screams shattered the air, chairs overturned. Tom lunged toward the window, but Sarah was already there. Her second swing cut his flight short, his body crashing into shattered glass. Sam rose with his gold-headed cane, intending to strike, but the blow never came. He staggered back, hands raised, and fell before her steady arc. Walter crawled across the rug, desperate, blood smearing a crimson trail across white linen and pine needles. His voice rasped a plea, but Sarah's gaze did not waver. The axe fell again, and his cry ended. The hall dissolved into chaos. Guests shrieked, scrambling over one another, faces pale in the candlelight. The fiddler dropped his instrument and ran for the wall. Some tried the doors, found them locked, and pounded with fists slick with wine and sweat. Sarah stood at the center, chest heaving, the axe dark with memory and blood. Around her, 4 brothers lay motionless, the lords of the house silenced in less than a minute. The Christmas feast lay overturned, wine mixing with blood across the tablecloth, the Star of Bethlehem trick extinguished in smoke. She did not linger. From the corner of the hall she seized the attic key. She unlocked the small door above the stairs and pulled Lisa out, trembling but alive. Nate stumbled after, half-healed but resolute. Together they ran through the kitchen passage, past the cold hearth, past the scent of charred meat and spilled rum, until the night air struck their faces. Outside, men shouted, neighbors, overseers, guards. But none rushed in. They hesitated before the locked hall, too afraid of what lay inside. Sarah led the children past them, through the yard, into the swamp fog that curled thick and merciful. On the doorstep of the Coleman house, she left one final mark. The broken whip that had cut Nate's back lay coiled there, a sign cast down like a verdict. Beneath the winter moon, it gleamed pale as bone, and with that, Sarah vanished into the night, swallowed by the fog and the silence of the marsh. Behind her, screams still rang from the hall. Before her, only the unknown opened its arms. The holiday was over. Dawn rose grey over Charleston, carrying with it a silence heavier than bells. Word spread faster than the tide, the Christmas massacre at the Coleman house. 4 brothers, 4 pillars of the city, lay dead in their own hall. Their feast was overturned, their bodies cooling beneath garlands of pine. Newspapers scrambled for language. Some called Sarah deranged, Others whispered demonic. Editors assured readers that it was madness, not justice, that had swung the axe. But in the kitchens, in the slave quarters, in the markets where mothers sold eggs to buy their children a crumb of mercy, another version travelled. In that telling, Sarah Miller had not lost her mind, she had reclaimed her name with steel. Mistress Emma, pale and trembling, told anyone who would listen that she had heard a sound not human before the candles went dark. Guests spoke of blood dripping into the punch bowl, of Sarah's face lit by firelight like a mask carved from stone. The constables who entered the hall refused to describe the scene in detail. One muttered only, "She locked them in, she made them stay." Fear spread among Charleston's elite. Some ordered their slaves shackled during meals, others banned knives from the quarters. Rumors bloomed like mold, slaves hoarding weapons, planning revolts, waiting for Christmas nights of their own. The Coleman estate became a cautionary tale told in parlors and whispered at auctions. But in the cabins by the river, the story was different. They said Sarah had walked into the swamp fog and kept walking, led by spirits older than chains. They said she had left behind not just corpses, but a message. The holiday is over. Children whispered her name as if it were a prayer. Elders spoke it like prophecy. Lisa was carried north under Quaker protection, hidden in wagons and barns, her small hands gripping scraps of bread offered by strangers who believed freedom was worth risk. Nate healed slowly, finding work with a boatman who smuggled news as well as cargo. Each carried Sarah's memory like a talisman. The authorities scoured the swamps for weeks. Dogs sniffed, torches flared, boats dragged channels. Nothing was found. Some swore she drowned, others that she reached the mountains, but among the enslaved, belief took root that she had not died at all. They said she walked still, an axe in her hand, her silence heavier than sermons, her presence felt wherever laughter mocked pain. Charleston shuddered, but did not forget. The Colemans were buried with pomp, their graves lined with marble. Sarah's name was struck from records, erased from ledgers. Yet she endured where memory lived in whispers, in warnings, in the quiet fire of those who still dreamed of breaking chains. Sarah Miller was no longer servant, no longer property. She had become story. And story, once freed, cannot be sold.